Hi, welcome to OpenLC Solutions. Today we're going through 2014 Ordinary Level Paper 2, and this is question 7, which is a statistics question. We're told about this newspaper report, which states 90% of homeowners who are liable for property tax registered for it, and the total number of properties liable for tax was 1.9 million. Based on that, we're asked to estimate the number of properties that were registered. Now, it's not entirely straightforward because we're told about the total number of properties, but then 90% of homeowners, not 90% of properties. But we don't really have much else to go on, so we're going to have to assume that 90% of homeowners is pretty much the same as 90% of properties. If there are 1.9 million properties in total that are liable for tax, 90% of those properties were registered, then the total number of properties that were registered is 90% of 1.9 million, which is 1.71 million. Part 2 asks us to suggest one reason why some properties were not registered, and why were these 10% of properties not registered. And there's any number of reasons. If you go by what the news is saying, then there's this movement of people who just don't want to pay. They think they're already paying plenty of tax, and so they don't want to have to pay another one. So people refusing to pay is one. There's also people not being able to afford it. And there's also other ones, like people don't know about it, or they don't think their property is liable for tax, or they own a property in the country, but actually they live abroad somewhere. There's tens of reasons that would be possible here. In Part B, we're told that there are different valuation bands for this property tax, kind of like with income tax, how there's a cutoff at 20%, and then if you earn more than that, there's 41%. So for different values of houses, they do different amounts of tax, but that comes up a little bit later. At the moment, all it's telling us is the percentage of homeowners that are in each valuation band. We're asked to represent the data in the pie chart, and we have to label each sector as usual, and we have to show the angle that we come up with. Since percentage is just a proportion, we can actually apply that proportion to a circle, and that will give us the angle. So let's say the first valuation band, 0 to 100,000. It's 24.9% of homeowners, and so it also works out 24.9% of 360 degrees. And that is 89.64 degrees. Then we have 100,001 up to 150,000. That's 28.6% of 360. And that is 102.96 degrees. Next, 150,001 up to 200,000, which is 21.9% of 360. That is 78.84 degrees. 200,001 up to 250,000. That's 10.4% of 360, which is 37.44 degrees. 250,001 up to 300,000. That's 4.9% this time of 360 degrees. That's 17.64 degrees. And lastly, over 300,000. That's 9.3% of 360 degrees. And that's 33.48 degrees. Now, I don't have a protractor, so I'm going to estimate these. The first one, 0 to 100,000, is about 90 degrees, so that's a quarter of the whole thing. This is 89.64 degrees, and it's for 0 up to 100,000. Next one is 102.96, which is going to be just a little bit more than 90, so there's 90. Let's say that's 103 degrees or so. Of course, when you have a protractor, in your geometry kit, then this will end up being a lot more accurate. Up to 150,000. Next one, 78.84 degrees, which is a little bit less than 90 this time. So there's about 90, so we got a little bit less. Something like that. There's 78.84 degrees, and this is 150,001 up to 200,000. Then 37.44, which is about a third or so of what's left. Something like that, maybe. That's 37.44 degrees, and this is 200,001 up to 250,000. Next, we got 17.6 degrees, so seems like about half of the previous one, maybe something like that. That's 17.64 degrees, 250,001 up to 300,000. And the remainder then must be 33.48 degrees, which is over 300,000. So that's that one done. We've labeled each sector and shown the angle in each sector clearly. Yep, that's it. Part C gives us a new table, and this is where they introduce the different amounts of tax that you pay depending on the valuation band that you're in. For example, if you're in the valuation band of 0 up to 100,000, you pay €45 on your property. We have to complete this table. One of the columns is the number of properties in each valuation band, and the final column is the total tax due. That is, how much money should the government be getting from each valuation band in total. It says we have to use the data in the table above, so I've taken the percentages from that table. The answer to part AI was when they asked us about 90% of liable properties, and that turned out to be 1.71 million properties in total. The way they figure out number of properties, and you can verify this as well, is it's the percentage of properties in that valuation band compared to the total number of properties that were registered. So if you work out 24.9% of 1.71 million, it should work out to be 425,790. And it's no coincidence that, in fact, it does work out that way. We can fill out the rest of this column the same way, so the second one's already done. 28.6% of 1.71 million will give you 489,060. If we work out 21.9% of 1.71 million, we end up with 374,490. If we look at 10.4% of 1.71 million, that is 177,840. The 4.9% of 1.71 million is 83,790. And the last one, 9.3% of 1.71 million, 159,030. To get the total tax due, you can try and figure out how they calculated it. You can imagine if each property is paying €45 and there's 425,790 properties in total, then all you have to do is multiply those two numbers together, and that will get you the total tax due. And if you do that multiplication, that's exactly what you find out. So you have to do multiplication between the tax per property and the number of properties, and that gets you the total tax due. When you do that for the next valuation band, you end up with 54,774,720. Next one, 58,794,930. Then 35,923,680. 20,696,130. And because there doesn't seem to be any tax on the 300,000 valuation band, there's no tax due on that. Part 2 of that question asks us to find the total tax due on those properties with a valuation up to 300,000. So we have all of these properties, we know the total tax due on each of them, and if we just add all of those up, that should get us the total. And so that is 189,350,010. Don't forget your euro symbol there at the start as well. The third part of this question tells us the total tax due on all of these properties was estimated to be 241 million. We have to find the total tax due on the properties with a valuation over 300,000. So this missing one here is actually meant to be a number. We just don't know what that number is. To find it out, we know the total should be 241 million. We've accounted for 189 million or so. The difference between those must be the extra amount added with this 300,000 bracket. And so the difference between those, 241 million, so it's just 6 zeros on the end. Subtract the amount we just had, 189,350,010, and that turns out to be 51,649,990, and that's euro. The fourth part asks us to find the mean estimated tax per property on those properties in the 300,000 band. Well, we know that the total amount, 51 million or so. We know the number of households that are going to be paying that, 159,000, which we know from the first part of this question. And so the mean is 1 divided by the other. So it is 51,649,990 divided by the number of households, 159,030. And that turns out to be €324.78. The last part of this question says some owners are being a bit clever about this and they're undervaluing their property because they know that they end up paying less tax. For example, there's an estimate that says 20% of properties in this 100,000 to 150,000 band should have been in the band just above that, 150,000 up to 200,000. And based on that estimate, we have to find the amount of extra tax that would be raised if they were in the correct band. How many of these properties are actually in the wrong band? Well, it's 20% of the number that are in that band, so 20% of the 489,060, which is 97,812. So they're paying 112 when they should be paying 157. In other words, they're paying €45 too little. So if they were in the right band, they would be paying €45 more each. In other words, we can work it out by saying 97,812 multiplied by 45, the extra amount that they should be paying. And that gives you 4,401,540. So that is that question done. Thank you very much for watching, and hopefully I'll talk to you again in the next episode.